The heat in Savannah hung thick as syrup that July morning. Dr. Eleanor Wright wiped sweat from her brow as she carefully unpacked the latest acquisition for the Historical Society's archives. The daguerreotype had arrived yesterday, an 1855 parish photograph discovered in the crawl space of St. John's Episcopal Church during renovations. "This is remarkable preservation," she murmured to her research assistant Marcus Chen. The image showed 8 young girls in formal Victorian dress, arranged in 2 rows before the church altar. Their solemn faces stared back through time, each wearing identical lace collars and dark dresses. Mid-1850s photography required subjects to remain still for extended periods, Eleanor explained, examining the image through her magnifying glass. That's why Victorian photographs rarely show smiles. These girls would have been positioned and told not to move for several minutes. Marcus nodded, making notes for their catalogue. The church records indicate this was the confirmation class of 1855, all daughters of prominent Savannah families. Eleanor continued her methodical examination, moving the magnifying glass across each face. Incredible detail for the period. You can almost see the texture of their... She stopped abruptly, the magnifying glass frozen over the image. "What is it?" Marcus asked, leaning closer. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly. "Third girl from the left, back row." Marcus squinted at the tiny figure. Unlike the other 7 girls who stared directly at the camera, this child's head was turned slightly, her gaze fixed on something beyond the frame. But what made Eleanor's skin prickle wasn't the girl's diverted attention. It was the unnatural length of the girl's fingers, which appeared elongated beyond human proportion, resting on the shoulder of the girl seated before her, and the slight blur around her figure, as if she alone had moved during the exposure. "That's just damage to the plate," Marcus suggested, though uncertainty colored his voice. Eleanor shook her head slowly. "No. Look at the contrast. The emulsion quality is consistent across the entire plate." She consulted the accompanying church records. 8 girls attended confirmation that spring. Their names are all here. As they studied the record, a chill passed through the climate-controlled room. The parish register listed each confirmed girl by name, with one disturbing notation beside the 3rd entry: Elizabeth Carrow, deceased February 17th, 1855. Eleanor looked back at the photograph, dated April 30th, 1855. "That's impossible," Marcus whispered. "If she died in February, then she couldn't have been present for this photograph in April," Eleanor finished, her academic mind racing for rational explanations. "Perhaps a recording error, or the photo is misdated." But deep down, she knew there would be no simple answer to why a deceased girl appeared in a parish photograph taken months after her death, or why her fingers stretched impossibly long against another child's shoulder. The following morning, Eleanor arrived at the Historical Society before dawn. She hadn't slept well, the parish photograph invading her dreams. Marcus joined her an hour later, carrying 2 coffee cups and a folder of research. "I spent half the night in the digital archives," he said, setting the coffee beside her. "Elizabeth Carrow definitely died on February 17th, 1855. Yellow fever. There's a newspaper obituary and cemetery records." Eleanor nodded grimly. "I found something too." She opened a leather-bound diary on her desk. This belonged to Reverend Thomas Whitfield, who served at St. John's from 1848 to 1860. Listen to this entry from April 29th, 1855, the day before the photograph. "Tomorrow the confirmation class shall be photographed after their ceremony. The girls are excited by the novelty of it. Mrs. Harrington insists her daughter Sarah will not stand near where Elizabeth once stood. The child's fears are indulged too much, I think, but I have arranged the positions accordingly. The loss still weighs heavily on them all." Marcus leaned against the desk. "So they were clearly aware she was dead when the photo was taken." "Exactly," Eleanor said. "This wasn't a record-keeping error. And there's more." She turned to an entry from May 3rd. "The photograph has caused a terrible stir among the parents. I have not seen it myself, as Mr. Calloway has taken the plate for examination. Several mothers claim to have seen poor Elizabeth among the girls, though I assured them this is impossible. Sarah Harrington has taken ill with fever and will not leave her bed. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Marcus picked up the photograph with gloved hands, studying it once more. We need to identify which girl is Sarah Harrington. Eleanor was already ahead of him, cross-referencing the confirmation roster with census records. Here, Sarah Harrington was the daughter of Thomas Harrington, a shipping merchant. She would have been 12 in 1855. She pointed to a girl in the front row, seated directly in front of where Elizabeth stood. That must be her. Marcus examined the image closely. Look at her expression compared to the others. While 7 of the girls maintained the typical stoic Victorian pose, Sarah's face held something different, a tightness around the eyes, a tension in her features suggesting suppressed terror. The diary mentions Sarah fell ill immediately after the photograph, Eleanor said quietly. Let me see if there's any follow-up. She paged through the journal, stopping suddenly. Her face paled as she read the May 17th entry. Young Sarah Harrington was laid to rest today, just 3 months after we buried Elizabeth. The physicians claim the fever took her, but her mother spoke wildly at the funeral of Elizabeth's cold fingers upon her daughter's shoulder. Mrs. Harrington has been taken to her sister's home in Charleston to recover from the shock of her loss. Eleanor and Marcus exchanged uneasy glances. The room's temperature seemed to drop several degrees despite the sweltering Savannah heat outside. We need to research what happened to the other girls in this photograph, Eleanor said finally, her academic curiosity warring with a growing sense of dread. The Historical Society's basement archives were rarely visited, housing the oldest and most fragile documents in the collection. Eleanor and Marcus spent hours there, dust motes dancing in the thin beams of light from the small ground-level windows. I found birth and death records for 6 of the 8 girls, Marcus said, spreading documents across the table, including Elizabeth and Sarah. Eleanor studied the papers, a disturbing pattern emerging. Sarah died 2 weeks after the photograph was taken, and here, Margaret Wilson died June 4th, 1855. Rebecca Taylor died August 21st, 1855. She looked up. All 4 girls died within 6 months of the photograph. Marcus nodded grimly. The official causes vary: yellow fever, consumption, drowning, and nervous affliction. But the timing can't be coincidence. Eleanor pulled out the photograph again. Let's identify their positions. They meticulously matched names to faces using the church records and census descriptions. When they finished, a chilling realization emerged. The deaths occurred in sequence, Eleanor whispered, starting with the girl Elizabeth was touching in the photograph, then moving to each girl she stood closest to. Marcus stepped back from the table. This is getting morbid, Eleanor. Maybe we should consider turning this over to Professor Blackwood. This type of historical anomaly is more his specialty. Eleanor shook her head. Not yet. I want to track down what happened to the other 4 girls first. She wasn't ready to share their discovery or admit how deeply it unsettled her. As a historian specializing in 19th century American photography, she'd built her reputation on rational analysis of primary documents. Yet nothing in her experience explained what they were uncovering. The next morning, Eleanor called Marcus from the courthouse archives. I found Catherine Palmer's death certificate, she said without preamble. November 10th, 1855, 5th girl to die. Cause of death? Marcus asked, his voice tight. Fright leading to heart failure, Eleanor read. According to the physician's notes, she woke screaming about cold fingers on her neck and died before dawn. That afternoon, they located records for Emily Blackwood, the 6th girl, who died in January 1856 after a sudden illness characterized by high fever and delirium. The 7th, Julia Montgomery, survived until March 1856 before succumbing to what doctors described as wasting melancholy. Only one girl survived past 1856, Marcus said, as they compiled their findings. Charlotte Davis lived until 1912. She never married and became a nun with the Sisters of Mercy in 1860. Eleanor leaned back in her chair. So Elizabeth appears in a photograph taken after her death, and within 1 year, 6 of the 7 remaining girls die under various circumstances. And the only survivor dedicates her life to the church, Marcus added, perhaps seeking protection. Eleanor made a decision. Tomorrow we visit Charlotte's convent. There might be records, letters, a diary, anything that could explain what happened. As they packed their notes, neither noticed the slight discoloration developing at the edges of the parish photograph, a darkening that hadn't been there that morning. The Sisters of Mercy convent stood on Savannah's eastern outskirts, its brick walls softened by centuries of coastal weather. Though the original 19th-century building had burned in 1912, the convent archives remained intact, preserved in a modern edition that served as both library and historical repository. Sister Agnes, the elderly archivist, greeted them warmly. Charlotte Davis? Yes, she was a significant figure here, Mother Superior from 1886 to 1910. We're researching her early life, Eleanor explained, particularly events surrounding her confirmation at St. John's in 1855. Something flickered in Sister Agnes's eyes. Recognition, perhaps wariness. Why that specific period? Eleanor hesitated, then decided on honesty. We've discovered a photograph from her confirmation class that contains certain anomalies. 7 of the 8 girls in the image died within a year of its taking. Charlotte was the only survivor. Sister Agnes's expression remained neutral, but her fingers tightened around her cane. Follow me. She led them to a small research room and disappeared briefly, returning with a wooden box. Mother Charlotte's personal effects. These were sealed upon her death with instructions they remain unopened for 50 years. When that time elapsed in 1962, the contents were catalogued, but rarely examined since. Inside the box lay several items: a rosary with jet beads, a small prayer book, a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon, and a leather journal. Sister Agnes pointed to the journal. This covers the years 1855 to 1860. I believe you'll find what you're seeking there, though I warn you, faith provides context for much of her writing. Left alone with the materials, Eleanor and Marcus began with the journal. Charlotte's handwriting, initially the uneven script of a 12-year-old, grew more refined as the pages progressed. They quickly found entries from spring 1855. April 30th. Today we were confirmed, and Mr. Calloway made our photograph afterward. I stood farthest from where Elizabeth used to stand. I still miss her terribly, but Mama says she rests with the angels now. Eleanor turned the page to a May 1st entry. Everyone is in disagreement about the photograph. Sarah's mother came to our house in tears, saying Elizabeth was visible in the image. My parents say this is hysteria and grief playing tricks. The Reverend has taken the photograph away, but not before I glimpsed it. I cannot write what I saw. I will not give it power through words. The next entries documented Charlotte's growing fear as her friends began falling ill and dying. By September 1855, after 4 deaths, her writing became frantic. I alone saw what happened that February day when Elizabeth died. We were playing in the church attic while our mothers prepared for the Missionary Society meeting. Elizabeth found an old box containing strange items, a painted mask, small carved figures, and a book with markings none of us recognized. She read aloud from the book despite our protests. The words sounded wrong in her mouth. When she finished reading, she looked strange. Her eyes were different. She smiled at us and said, "Now I will never be alone." That night, she died of fever. I believe something entered Elizabeth that day. Something that finished her and then took her place in our photograph. Something that is now taking my friends one by one. I have told no one. Who would believe a child? Marcus looked up from the journal. This suggests they discovered some kind of artifact in the church attic, possibly something brought back by missionaries. Eleanor nodded. St. John's was known for its foreign mission work in the 1850s. They had connections to expeditions in West Africa and the Caribbean. Datum. They continued reading, as Charlotte's entries described her increasing desperation, trying to protect herself with prayers and religious symbols. In December 1855, after 5 deaths, she wrote of visiting a woman named Mama Laveau in a small house beyond the city limits. Mama Laveau listened to my story without surprise. She said what came through the photograph was an old spirit that feeds on youth and innocence. She gave me a charm to wear and instructions I must follow precisely. I paid her with the gold locket Papa gave me for my birthday. When I asked why Elizabeth's spirit would harm us, her friends, Mama Laveau shook her head and said, "Child, that thing in your photograph was never your friend Elizabeth." Eleanor and Marcus sat in stunned silence after finishing Charlotte's journal. The final relevant entry, dated April 1856, described how Charlotte had returned to St. John's Church at midnight during a new moon, carrying specific items Mama Laveau had prepared. According to Charlotte's account, she performed a ritual in the church attic where Elizabeth had first found the mysterious box, then buried something beneath an oak tree in the churchyard. "If we approach this academically," Eleanor said finally, "there are several explanations. Mass hysteria, coincidental deaths during a period when childhood mortality was high, or Charlotte's grief manifesting as supernatural beliefs." Marcus nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "But what about Elizabeth appearing in the photograph months after her documented death?" "Early photographic processes were prone to anomalies," Eleanor reasoned, though her scholarly certainty felt hollow. "Double exposures, plate flaws. That don't happen to appear exactly where a dead girl would have stood," Marcus challenged. "With elongated fingers touching the first victim?" Eleanor had no answer. The rational frameworks of her academic training seemed inadequate against the weight of what they'd discovered. "We should examine the original church attic," she said finally, "and find that oak tree Charlotte mentioned." The current rector of St. John's, Reverend Michael Palmer, was initially reluctant to allow them access to the church attic. "It's primarily used for storage now, and rather precarious. The floorboards haven't been replaced since the 1920s. Eleanor showed him her Historical Society credentials. "We're researching architectural changes to the church for the city's historical preservation project," she lied smoothly. "It won't take long." The attic was stifling in the July heat, dust particles floating visibly in the beams of light from small, round windows. Most of the space was filled with Christmas decorations, broken furniture, and stacked hymnals from previous decades. "The church was partially renovated in 1887, Marcus said, consulting the building plans they'd found. "But this southeast corner still has the original flooring." They moved carefully across the ancient boards toward the corner. Eleanor ran her hand along the wall, feeling for any irregularities. Charlotte's journal mentioned a hidden compartment where missionary items were stored. After 20 minutes of methodical searching, Marcus called out, "Eleanor, look at this." He pointed to a section of baseboard that appeared slightly different from the rest. Kneeling, Eleanor pressed against it, feeling a slight give. With gentle pressure, a small section swung inward, revealing a shallow space behind. "It's empty," she said, disappointed. Then her fingers brushed something at the back of the recess. A small object pressed into a crack. She carefully worked it free. In her palm lay a tarnished silver button. Engraved on its surface was a pattern of interconnected circles. "This matches the description of buttons on Elizabeth's dress," Marcus whispered, referring to the detailed inventory of Elizabeth's burial clothes they'd found in the Carrow family papers. Eleanor pocketed the button, a chill running through her despite the oppressive heat. "Let's check the churchyard." Outside, ancient oak trees surrounded St. John's, their massive branches draped with Spanish moss that swayed in the slight breeze. "Charlotte's journal mentioned the oak nearest the east wall," Marcus said. orienting himself. They located the massive tree, its trunk at least 5 feet in diameter. This tree would have been substantial even in 1856, Eleanor noted, circling it slowly. She said she buried something at its base. The ground around the oak was covered with packed earth and sparse grass, undisturbed for what appeared to be decades. Eleanor knelt, running her hands over the soil near the tree's massive roots. "We'd need ground-penetrating radar to find anything buried here," Marcus said after they'd spent nearly an hour searching. Eleanor stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "Let's head back. I want to re-examine the photograph with what we know now." As they walked toward the church gates, Eleanor glanced back at the tree. For an instant, she thought she saw a girl in a dark Victorian dress standing beneath its branches. She blinked, and the figure vanished. "Did you see that?" she asked sharply. Marcus followed her gaze. "See what?" Eleanor shook her head. "Nothing, just the heat playing tricks." But her heart raced as they returned to her car. Back at the Historical Society, Eleanor carefully removed the parish photograph from its archival sleeve. The image had deteriorated noticeably since yesterday, dark spots spreading from the corners, the contrast fading. "Photographic degradation shouldn't happen this rapidly in controlled conditions," she murmured, examining it under the light. Marcus leaned closer. "The degradation seems to be spreading from Elizabeth's figure." He was right. The darkening was most pronounced around the image of the deceased girl, as if some chemical reaction was emanating from her photographed form. Eleanor reached for her magnifying glass, then froze. "Marcus," she whispered, "look at Elizabeth's position." In the original examination, they had noted Elizabeth stood in the back row, her unnaturally long fingers resting on Sarah Harrington's shoulder. Now, Elizabeth's figure appeared to have shifted slightly. Her hand was no longer on Sarah's shoulder, but extended toward the next girl in the sequence, Margaret Wilson, the second to die after the photograph was taken. "That's impossible," Marcus said, his voice strained. "Photographic emulsion doesn't move." Eleanor fought to maintain her scholarly detachment. The chemical deterioration must be creating an illusion of movement. Even as she offered this explanation, she knew it was inadequate. She thought of Charlotte's journal entry. "I cannot write what I saw. I will not give it power through words." "We need to research this Mama Laveau character," Marcus said, breaking the tense silence. "If she was a real person, there might be records of other consultations or incidents." Eleanor nodded gratefully, relieved to return to concrete historical research. The name suggests voodoo connections. There were several established practitioners in 19th century Savannah, particularly in the years before the Civil War. They spent the remainder of the day in the archives, searching through census records, city directories, and newspaper accounts. By evening, they had compiled a slim file on Marie Laveau, sometimes called Mama Laveau, who lived on the outskirts of Savannah from approximately 1840 to 1870. She appears to have been a free woman of color who sold herbal remedies and provided spiritual consultations, Eleanor summarized. The newspapers mention her being questioned in connection with several unexplained events, but never charged. "Including this," Marcus said, pointing to an 1857 article. "A wealthy merchant claimed she cursed his business after he refused to pay her for services. When his warehouse burned down a week later, he publicly accused her of arson." Eleanor read the article with interest. The merchant's name was Thomas Harrington, Sarah's father. "The same man who lost his daughter after the parish photograph," Marcus confirmed. "It seems he sought Mama Laveau's help after Charlotte did, but with less favorable results." Eleanor leaned back, processing this connection. So Charlotte Davis consulted Mama Laveau and survived. She followed specific instructions involving a ritual in the church attic and burying something under the oak tree. Meanwhile, the photograph is deteriorating, and Elizabeth's position appears to be changing, Marcus added, glancing uneasily at the image in its protective sleeve. Eleanor made a decision. "Tomorrow we're taking this photograph to Dr. Reed in the university's chemistry department. I want a scientific analysis of whatever is happening to the emulsion." As they prepared to leave, Eleanor carefully returned the photograph to the archive safe. Neither of them noticed the small puddle of dark liquid that had begun to seep from the sealed archival sleeve, nor the faint, sweet smell of decay that lingered in the air after they left. Dr. Sophia Reed's laboratory at Savannah University was equipped with the latest imaging technology for analyzing historical artifacts. The chemistry professor listened intently as Eleanor explained their research, carefully omitting any mention of supernatural elements. "So you've observed unusual degradation in a 19th century daguerreotype," Dr. Reed summarized. "And you're seeking chemical analysis of the emulsion breakdown." "Exactly," Eleanor confirmed. "The deterioration began suddenly and is progressing rapidly, concentrated around one specific figure in the image." Dr. Reed nodded. "Let's take a look." Eleanor removed the archival sleeve from her bag and immediately noticed something wrong. The protective material was damp, a dark stain spreading across its surface. With gloved hands, she carefully opened the sleeve. The photograph inside had deteriorated dramatically overnight. The once clear image was now marred by dark blotches, the facial features of several girls nearly obliterated by the spreading decay. Only Elizabeth's figure remained crisp and clear, and unmistakably altered from the original. Where once she had stood in the back row, her figure now appeared closer to the center of the group. Her face, previously turned slightly away, now looked directly at the camera with an expression that hadn't been there before, a slight smile that revealed too many teeth. "Fascinating degradation pattern," Dr. Reed murmured, seemingly oblivious to the impossibility of what they were seeing. "Let me get this under the microscope." As the professor prepared her equipment, Marcus whispered urgently to Eleanor, "This goes beyond any photographic anomaly I've ever encountered. We're watching the image transform in real time." Eleanor nodded, her scholarly skepticism crumbling under the weight of evidence. "If, and I can't believe I'm saying this, if Charlotte's journal is accurate, then whatever entered Elizabeth is still active in this photograph. And we've disturbed it by bringing it out of storage." Dr. Reed's voice interrupted their whispered conference. "You'll want to see this," she said, gesturing to the microscope. One by one they looked through the eyepiece at a magnified section of the photograph, the area around Elizabeth's figure. "The emulsion appears to be moving," Dr. Reed said, scientific curiosity overwhelming her disbelief. "I've never seen anything like it. The silver particles are realigning themselves. This isn't chemical deterioration. It's more like the photographic material is being repurposed." As they watched, a drop of dark liquid beaded at the edge of the photograph and fell onto the laboratory table. Dr. Reed reached for it with a swab. "Don't touch it," Eleanor warned, but too late. The moment Dr. Reed's gloved finger contacted the droplet, she jerked back with a gasp of pain. "It burned through the glove," she said, staring at her finger where a small red mark was forming. Marcus quickly produced a tissue and wiped away the substance. "We need to contain this photograph before it deteriorates further." Dr. Reed, scientific training warring with what she'd just experienced, nodded shakily. "I can place it in a sealed vacuum chamber. That might slow whatever process is occurring." While the professor prepared the chamber, Eleanor examined the photograph once more. With growing horror, she realized Elizabeth's figure now occupied a different position entirely, standing directly behind the image of Charlotte Davis, the sole survivor, with one elongated hand reaching toward the back of Charlotte's neck. "She's coming for Charlotte," Eleanor whispered, "even though Charlotte died naturally decades later." "But Charlotte is already dead," Marcus said. "What could this thing possibly want now?" A terrible realization dawned on Eleanor. "It's not Charlotte it wants." She looked up at Marcus, fear constricting her throat. "We're the ones who disturbed it. We brought it out into the light." At that moment, Dr. Reed returned with the vacuum chamber. They carefully transferred the deteriorating photograph into the sealed container. "This should prevent further environmental exposure," Dr. Reed said, "though I can't explain what's causing this unusual reaction." Eleanor thanked her, anxious to remove the photograph from the university. "We'll continue our analysis at the Historical Society. Thank you for your assistance." As they left the laboratory with the sealed chamber, Eleanor felt a weight pressing against her chest, a dread that had nothing to do with the summer heat or academic pressure. Whatever was happening to the parish photograph had moved beyond historical mystery into something she had no framework to understand. "We need to find out exactly what Charlotte buried under that oak tree," she told Marcus as they hurried across campus, "and we need to do it today." The July sun beat down mercilessly as Eleanor and Marcus returned to St. John's churchyard. They had stopped at a hardware store to purchase shovels and work gloves, drawing curious looks from the cashier. "We should wait until dark," Marcus suggested as they parked nearby. "Digging in a historic churchyard in broad daylight might attract attention." Eleanor shook her head. "There's no time. The photograph is deteriorating too quickly." She didn't voice her deeper fear that whatever presence inhabited the photograph was growing stronger with each passing hour. They approached the ancient oak tree, attempting to appear as casual researchers examining the historic grounds. Fortunately, the churchyard was empty in the midday heat. Eleanor knelt at the base of the tree, on the side facing away from the street. "Charlotte's journal said she buried something directly beneath the largest root," she said, running her hands over the ground. Marcus joined her and they began carefully removing the topsoil with their hands, using the small shovels only when necessary. After 20 minutes of increasingly desperate digging, Eleanor's fingers struck something solid. "Here," she whispered, brushing away dirt to reveal a small metal box, approximately 6 inches square, corroded by decades underground. The box was sealed shut, its lock long since fused with rust. Marcus used a screwdriver from his pocket toolkit to pry at the lid. With a groan of protesting metal, the box opened. Inside lay several items: a small cloth doll with Elizabeth's name stitched across its chest, a tarnished silver button matching the one they'd found in the attic, a folded paper covered with symbols neither recognized, and a small glass vial containing what appeared to be dried herbs and a dark substance that might have once been liquid. "These must be the items Mamma Laveau prepared for Charlotte," Eleanor said, carefully lifting the vial. As her fingers closed around it, a wave of dizziness washed over her. For an instant, she wasn't kneeling in the churchyard but standing in a dimly lit room, watching a dark-skinned woman with intense eyes grinding herbs in a mortar. "Listen carefully, child," the woman was saying. "What follows your friend isn't Elizabeth anymore. It found her through that missionary's book and used her death to cross over. Now it feeds on young souls, growing stronger with each one it takes." The vision passed as quickly as it had come, leaving Eleanor gasping. "What happened?" Marcus asked, gripping her arm to steady her. "I saw her, Mamma Laveau," Eleanor said shakily. "It was like a memory, but not my own." They carefully repacked the items in the box and covered their excavation as best they could. As they walked back to the car, Eleanor felt a growing certainty about what they needed to do. "We need to recreate Charlotte's ritual," she said, using these items and the instructions in her journal. Marcus looked skeptical. "Eleanor, we're historians, not whatever this is. Maybe we should turn everything over to experts in paranormal investigation." Eleanor stopped walking. "What experts, Marcus? Who has more information about this specific incident than we do?" She gestured to the box. "Charlotte survived when all her friends died. She found a way to protect herself. If there's even a chance this thing is active again, that it's somehow using the photograph to reach out, we need to contain it the same way she did." Back at the Historical Society, they spread Charlotte's journal and the box contents on Eleanor's desk. The sealed vacuum chamber containing the photograph sat nearby, its surface now fogged with condensation despite the controlled environment inside. Eleanor flipped to the relevant journal entry from April 1856. Charlotte had described a specific ritual involving binding the doll with thread soaked in a mixture from the vial, reciting certain phrases written on the folded paper, and finally sealing the doll, button and paper together in the box before burial. The ritual needs to be performed in the church attic, where Elizabeth first encountered whatever this is, Eleanor said, reading the detailed instructions. Marcus checked his watch. It's almost 4:30. The church office closes at 5, and there's a vestry meeting tonight at Savannah, according to their website. If we're going to do this, we need to move quickly. Eleanor stared at the vacuum chamber. Through the condensation, she could barely make out the photograph inside, and what appeared to be a dark figure, now standing separate from the group of girls, its proportions elongated and distorted. "Let's go," she said, gathering the items from Charlotte's box. Reverend Palmer was locking the church office when they arrived. Eleanor approached him with a carefully crafted story about needing to recheck some architectural details in the attic for their preservation report. "It won't take long," she promised. "We can let ourselves out through the side door when we're finished." The Reverend hesitated, keys jingling in his hand. "The vestry meets in an hour. You'll need to be done by then." "Absolutely," Eleanor assured him. 30 minutes, tops." Once alone in the church, they moved quickly to the attic stairs. Eleanor carried Charlotte's box, while Marcus brought the vacuum chamber containing the photograph. The sealed container had grown increasingly clouded during the drive, the contents barely visible through a film of dark condensation. The attic was even more stifling than before, the accumulated heat of the day trapped beneath the roof. Eleanor immediately moved to the southeast corner where they'd found the hidden compartment. "According to Charlotte's journal, we need to recreate the original configuration," she said, opening the small recess in the baseboard. "The doll goes inside, with the button and paper." Marcus set down the vacuum chamber and helped Eleanor prepare the items. Following Charlotte's instructions, they wrapped the doll in thread soaked with the remaining contents of the vial. The liquid had long since dried, but they moistened it with water, as Charlotte had noted doing in her journal. As they worked, the temperature in the attic seemed to drop precipitously, despite the summer heat. Eleanor's breath fogged in front of her face. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. Marcus nodded, his eyes fixed on the vacuum chamber. The condensation was clearing, revealing the photograph inside. The image had changed dramatically. The group of girls was now blurred beyond recognition, while a distinct figure stood separate from them. It barely resembled Elizabeth now. The form was elongated, the fingers unnaturally long, the face a distorted version of the Victorian girl's features. "Hurry!" Marcus urged, his voice tight. Eleanor placed the wrapped doll inside the compartment, then added the button and folded paper with its strange symbols. Her hands trembled as she read aloud the phonetic phrases Charlotte had transcribed in her journal, words in a language Eleanor didn't recognize. As she spoke the final syllable, a violent tremor ran through the attic. Dust rained down from the rafters, and the floorboards creaked ominously. The vacuum chamber containing the photograph shattered, glass exploding outward in a spray of dark liquid that splattered across the wooden floor. Eleanor and Marcus instinctively shielded their faces. When they looked again, the photograph lay in the midst of the broken glass, its surface bubbling as if boiling from within. "Finish it!" Marcus shouted over a rising sound like wind howling through the rafters. Eleanor snatched up the photograph with gloved hands and thrust it into the compartment alongside the doll and other items. The moment the photograph touched the doll, a piercing shriek filled the attic, a sound no human throat could produce. The liquid from the photograph seemed to come alive, crawling up Eleanor's gloves like sentient tar. She jerked back, slamming the compartment shut and pressing the baseboard back into place. For a moment nothing happened. Then a final violent tremor shook the attic. Eleanor and Marcus clutched each other as the temperature rapidly returned to normal, the oppressive summer heat replacing the unnatural cold. "Is it over?" Marcus asked shakily. Before Eleanor could answer, they heard footsteps on the stairs. Reverend Palmer appeared in the attic doorway, his expression concerned. "Is everything all right up here?" The entire building shook. I thought it might be an earthquake. Eleanor struggled to compose herself. "Just an old floorboard giving way under our weight," she improvised. "Nothing structural. We've finished our examination." The Reverend didn't look entirely convinced, but he nodded. "The vestry members are arriving? I'll need to lock up the main building now." They followed him downstairs, neither speaking until they reached Eleanor's car. "What do we tell people?" Marcus finally asked as they sat in the parking lot. "About the photograph, about what happened." Eleanor stared at the church, its stained glass windows glowing warmly in the evening light. "Academically, we document that the photograph suffered catastrophic deterioration due to improper historical storage and environmental factors. That our analysis was inconclusive due to the degraded state of the primary source material." "And unofficially?" Marcus pressed. Eleanor looked down at her hands. Though she'd removed the gloves, she could still feel the cold sensation of that dark liquid crawling across her skin. "Unofficially, we acknowledge that some historical mysteries remain unsolved," she said quietly, "and some are better left that way. 3 months.